Tonight's guest is Abdullah EL Khatib. Abdullah, welcome to the show.
Hello, Vic. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. Abdullah, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Okay, so my name is Abdullah, and I am the junior of a senior. My grandfather, I was named after him. I'm first generation Arab American, 25 years old currently. I discovered the punk rock and I started doing a lot of things when I was still living out in the Middle East. And I found a lot of inspiration in things that I thought I would never find inspiration in. And I just kind of dove deeper into discovering myself and discovering my interests and tastes. And I'm comfortable with the person I am right now. And I do think that everyone is capable of doing anything that they set their mind to.
You're right. Yeah, you couldn't be more right about that. Anything you set your mind to, you can definitely achieve and do. And you just mentioned inspiration, things you found inspiration in. What one thing can you point to is inspiring you more than anything else?
Honestly, my sister. My sister has inspired me a lot, and I learned a lot from her. She kind of tapped into my hidden potential to write poetry and essays, and she just motivates me to become a better person and just do the best for myself and for the family and for everyone around me. So I think she was the most person or thing that has motivated me in my life.
Well, that's great. It sounds like you hit the lottery when it comes to sisters.
Oh yeah, she's the best.
That's great. It sounds like it. You were referred to me by a friend. What's the story behind that?
Okay, so my friend, he never was too comfortable about talking about his encounter. About a year or two ago, we were in a group chat and we were all videoing together and we were all talking about like weird encounters we had with like just beasts and stuff that you might find like just wandering around. And he mentioned something about Dogman. And when he first said that, I was like, what's a Dogman? You know, like I never heard people use that word before. And then he started describing how they looked, and I was like, wait a second, this is something that I had encountered with. So I told him about my encounter. Just a few months ago, he actually told me about this show, and he told me about you, Vic. He said I should reach out and talk about my encounter, and I was actually very thrilled for you to reach out to me as soon as you did, because I didn't even send it like for a week, and I already had a message and everything, and both of us are very excited and stoked about this, and it's just an honor to be a part of something like this. And like, it's a great pleasure for me.
Well, I'm so glad you reached out. And as you know, it's a pleasure to talk with you, but no. You can't just tell us that your friend had a Dogman encounter like that and move on. You've got to tell us about the encounter.
My friend, I guess he had his encounter not too recently, but it seems like he's still not as comfortable as I am or other people about talking about his encounter, because he seemed like to be a little bit shaken up by it. It seemed like it was a pretty intense encounter. So when I mentioned my encounter, he was very stoked to hear that he's not the only one in that friend group that had this encounter with a Dogman. I kind of kept it at that because he didn't really seem too keen on talking about his encounter. I don't think he was exactly comfortable. So I just didn't want to pester him about it. And I just kept it at like, you had an encounter. Okay, cool.
No, I get it. Talking about your Dogman encounter is not something that everyone's going to be comfortable doing. So I definitely get it. Abdullah, your encounter happened in a place where most people wouldn't even think you could find a Dogman. Please expand on that for us.
Okay, so I was actually initially born in Boston, Massachusetts, and at 4 years old, my family decided to move to the Middle East. I'm half Jordanian, half Palestinian, so we moved to Jordan. Based on from what I've heard, like in the folklore and stuff, we don't really have a lot of encounters similar to that in that area of the world. But there are like other things that have been apparent in the Middle East, and there are a lot of stories and of things people have seen and encountered in the wild or encountered in their homes, encountered in the cities and the towns. I think to an extent, it is not as common as it would be in the States, for example, but it happens for sure.
They happen in all sorts of places where you never would think they'd happen. It's hard to understand how they happen in some of the places they do, but they do. When a lot of people in the West think about countries like Jordan, they don't realize there are actually forests there. What more can you tell us about that?
Jordan actually had a lot more forests because Jordan was colonized by Britain. And at the time, I remember a lot of stories, like older people in like previous generations would tell me Jordan had lions, had all this wilderness, expansive forests, and just a lot of terrain and a lot of places to explore and a lot to see. But after the British invasion, they would cut the trees down for fuel for the trains. So basically, there was a huge deforestation in the Middle East, including Jordan. What is left of that is not as much as it used to be, but there is still some green areas and a lot of forestation and a lot of places just with lots of trees and thick bushes and everything.
Good habitat for a dogman, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
Being as conservative of a place as Jordan is, how are things like cryptids looked at there?
Mostly because of the nature of Jordan. It's a Muslim country. So most of these encounters are usually just brushed off like, oh, you need to pray, you need to mention God more, you need to, like, this is just a demon or something as bad is going to happen to you. And it's mostly just brushed off and people are just told to pray and have God in their prayers and just to forget about it and maybe just say like, oh, it was a jinn or like a demon of some sort. So we don't really have words for cryptids in Arabic at all. Like, I've done my research, believe me, so there's barely any words for it. Most of the cryptids that are well known and spread in the States.
Could you possibly get into trouble legally there for openly talking about a dogman encounter you had?
It depends on the circumstances. Not necessarily get in trouble, but mostly just frowned upon. Like, you would become a spectacle of maybe bullying, or especially like in school, you would become a spectacle. Like, oh, this person saw that. They're crazy, like Jordan, for example, is a very small country. So word of mouth gets around really fast. People you have never met in your life will walk up to you and tell you about what you just described or what you just talked about. And you're like, who are you? I never met you in my life. And they know everything about you.
Wow, that could be scary.
Yeah, it is.
That would be. All right, Abdullah, please tell us about your encounter now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
This all happened when I was living out in Jordan. I was around 10 or 11 years old, and my grandfather, he had an olive farm out in a rural area in Jordan, in a city called Salt, and the town that we were in was called Spehe. We had a beautiful home at this farm, a swimming pool, lots of land, lots of acres and acres and acres of olive trees. It was a normal day. We usually go to the farm on a Friday because Friday is the day off. We would swim in the swimming pool because it was summer and it was a beautiful day. Everything was normal. We were just swimming, enjoying ourselves, and then food was about to be prepared. So we all got out of the pool, dried ourselves, showered, and helped with preparing the food. We sat down on the table, we ate, and I just started feeling a little bit strange, like as if something is peering or watching me. I didn't think much of it, so I just ate and distracted myself, and the sun set. Around this time of the day, when the sun sets and it's a little bit dark outside, we would sit in front of the house on some lawn chairs. We would either gaze upon the stars because when it's rural, there's not a lot of light pollution, so we were able to see the stars in great depth, and we could see thousands and thousands of stars, and it was a very beautiful sight to see at night. Just as usual, me and my siblings would just be wandering around or looking for bugs to play with or just getting in all sorts of trouble. So the house was on the top of a hill, and down a hill was a little stretch of a road, like a dirt road, a dirt passageway that led directly to where we would keep the animals. So all the animals were asleep, and I decided I just wanted to go over and inspect them and look at them. So I went down, and the gate leading up to the animals and the passageway was locked. So I climbed over it, and I walked all the way to the end of the dirt road, which was less than a minute. I saw that the animals were all asleep and everything seemed fine to me, so I got up and I wanted to leave. As I was climbing the fence again, I tripped and I fell and I stumbled and I scraped my knee and my shoulder. All of a sudden, I started looking at the blood and I started to feel something closing in on me, and I started hearing loud thumps, and something scratching along the floor. I was looking at my wounds, and all of a sudden it's as if something like a bloodhound sniffed me out and was able to pinpoint my exact location based on the blood that was drawn. So I looked up and I hear this really, really thick breathing, very deep, and it sounded like growling almost. So I look up and it's this beast, huge, probably 10 feet tall. It has pointed ears, just like a wolf would have, and a huge head with big jaws and a muzzle like a bloodhound, huge nose and really, really angry eyes. And it was snarling at me, and I could see its canines. It just looked like it was about to just grab me and do whatever it wanted to me. It could have tore me to shreds and no one would have even known. It had long, bony arms, and at the end of the arms, there were huge hands, massive claws that were grayish, blackish in color. Probably each claw was around, I'd say 7, 8 inches. It basically stood there staring at me. So I started looking all the way from up all the way to the bottom, and I could see its legs, I could see its abdomen, I could see its hairy chest, and the legs were long and bent up in all sorts of weird manners. It looked at me for a second. I felt terrified. I was completely shaken. I had no idea what I could possibly do to get myself out of a situation like this. It was extremely terrifying. And I know it could have torn me to shreds if it wanted to. But then it looked at me again, and it looked up to the moon, and it unleashed this really, really loud howling noise, which had a deafening and paralyzing effect on me. And it's like you can almost see the sound waves coming out of its mouth, and really, really loud. And I don't think anyone heard it, but it was very loud. I couldn't move because of the noise, and it just felt like it had me pinned down there just by its voice alone. And then all of a sudden looks up on me, looks down at me, turns around, gets on all fours and just bolts. And it runs down the hill through the plethora of olive trees. It just runs and runs and runs away. And I try to get up and kind of come to my senses, and I thought to myself, I was just seeing things just because I just felt very scared. So I didn't really bring it up to anyone. I didn't feel comfortable talking about it to anyone. So that night, when I went back home after the farm, I was very quiet. And even my family, they noticed it. They're like, "What's wrong, Abdullah?" I'm like, nothing. I'm just tired because of the swimming. So when I arrived home, I was still shaken up. I took another shower and I got ready to go to bed. But at night, it was very difficult for me to fall asleep. I still felt that same sensation that something was watching me. I couldn't shake that feeling. So that night, I only got a few hours of sleep. The night after that, I had really terrible, vivid nightmares of this beast that I had just witnessed. It was basically very hard for me to understand what this encounter was, so I didn't really know what to think, to be honest. The nightmares continued for months and months, and then all of a sudden, I just started trying to slowly forget about it. And it seemed like for a while, like my mind completely blocked it off from my memory. Until a few years after, when I thought about it, I realized that this was real. It actually happened to me. And then the nightmares continued after that. So they stopped for a while, and then they basically started coming back again when I started to think about it some more. This is when I'm feeling comfortable talking about it, and I'm glad that my friend pointed me in the direction that he pointed me in, and for me to be able to understand that this is a normal thing and it's just something that people unfortunately have encounters with, and it's nothing to be afraid of, and as long as you weren't harmed, there's no wrong in it. And these beasts, it's kind of like they play with you. It just seemed like that cryptid that I saw wanted to get a reaction out of me. It scared me, terrified me. But now I can say I'm not afraid of it anymore. Sure, if it showed up in front of me, I would bolt in the other direction because it could easily do anything it wanted. That was my encounter with the Dogman.
When it comes to your ability to deal with that encounter present day, Abdullah, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no problem whatsoever, 10 being a huge problem and very difficult to deal with, where would you say you're at?
I'd say a 3 or a 4.
Oh, that's good. If you start to go up, you know how to contact me. Please reach out to me and let me know if that does happen, and by all means, we'll find out what's giving you trouble and we'll address it.
That sounds great to me, Vic.
Please don't forget that. It sounds like other people were around when you had that encounter. Did you ever think about calling out for help when you saw that Dogman coming toward you?
I did think about it, but in the moment, I was just so scared and just shocked and in awe by this encounter that I didn't even think to speak a single word. My mouth was shut the entire time and I was just paralyzed in fear. So if I did want to call someone, I couldn't have at that point. I was just frozen, completely frozen.
Well, yeah, you can't be faulted for that. I mean, most people, when they see especially a 10-foot tall dogman coming towards them like that at close range, they're going to lock up. So that doesn't make you any different from most people.
Mm-hmm.
When you saw it coming toward you, were you more focused on trying to figure out what in the world it was, or were you more focused on trying to get the heck out of there?
I was more focused on trying to figure out what it was, to be honest. I mean, as a kid, I was a very curious person and I loved animals and just reading about them and watching documentaries and seeing animals in person at the zoos and exhibitions and stuff. So I was more interested in what it was more than I was scared.
I can only imagine the thoughts that must have been racing through your head.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of those and I just couldn't pinpoint what it was, so I was left with a lot of questions.
Well, I'm sure you were. Yeah, way too many questions. You just mentioned your interest in strange things as a kid. Had you even heard about cryptids or especially dogmen before you had that encounter?
The only thing I heard about before this encounter was Yetis, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster. Nothing too much, too in detail. The basic cryptids and such. And I didn't really have a lot of experience with cryptids at the time. And I was mostly just into insects, actually. I had a fascination with insects and spiders. So I didn't really know exactly what it was.
No, that's totally understandable. In some countries, the shows you can watch on TV are restricted. Before you had that encounter as a kid there, were cryptid-related shows even available for viewing?
Yeah, they were. In Jordan, it was more difficult to access the channels that they have in the States. You had to have like a special subscription and you had to pay a lot of money every month. So most people didn't really have a lot of channels with Western or Japanese cartoons or shows or anything basically. And a lot of those shows, like especially like supernatural or stuff like that. Like it's mostly frowned upon. Like stuff that deals with magic and the unknowns and cryptids and such. It wasn't as accessible, but it was definitely there. And if you had the time and money, you could definitely look deeper into it.
I'm glad to hear you had access to them then. If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to talk with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know. You described its muzzle as looking like a bloodhound's. Does that mean its muzzle was more rounded than pointed like a German Shepherd's?
Yes, so it was a little pointed, not like almost like a German Shepherd's, but it was a little bit more flat on the top, like kind of like a tiger's nose of some sort. Like it was just more like just sitting there in the middle of its face, and it was just a little bit pointed out. It looked more like a tiger or a lion's snout. It was mostly just like it would slowly go down and then kind of bulge up at the end.
I see what you're saying. Beyond a certain size, the muzzle's gonna tend to be flatter on top, like on a tiger's muzzle, for example, so yeah, that makes sense. When it stood there staring at you before it howled, did it ever make any sounds then?
It was releasing this like growling noise. It was more like kind of like a dog would when it's growling and snarling and about to bark or bite. It was more of like this intimidating growl that just kept persistent, and it was there the entire time it was facing me. It was just this very low and grisly voice.
If it was making that growling, somewhat snarling sound, did it look angry as it was standing there?
Yes, it looked extremely angry, and it looked like I had wronged it in some way. It looked like it was just about to slash me with his claws or bite me or just grab me and take me into the trees and never be heard about again.
Well, I can understand why you were worried about him doing that, but thank goodness he didn't have any interest in doing that.
Thankfully.
Do you think the blood from your knee is definitely what drew it to you, or do you think it just smelled you, your own scent?
So when I was younger, that's the conclusion I drew. But now that I think about it more, I think it was drawn to me instead, because I did feel like something watching me throughout the entire day that day. I just guess it caught me at a moment of weakness, and it approached me when I was down, basically, just to scare me more, or maybe intimidate me in a way, or just kind of have some control over me when I'm on the ground and trying to recover from my scrapes.
Yeah, you might be right. That might be what was behind it. It's hard to say. You said that you tried to poo-poo your encounter away as being some kind of a waking bad dream, but did you ever go back down there to look for footprints?
I honestly never did. I was so scared, and basically I never really saw footprints. I remember visiting that same place in the morning a few weeks after, and I did go down, but it was daylight. I was so afraid of going down back there at night. It was daylight, and I tried to look for tracks. I never found anything.
Was it standing in a place where it would definitely leave prints, or was it standing on grass?
It was dirt. But the thing is, where it was, so if you go down the hill, straight ahead is a cliff. To the right, the first right, is where the animals were. You go down a dirt path down where the animals were. And the second right, it was an incline. It was going down, and then it would go down like a stairs, left to right, just going down from left to right, and it would just keep going down until it reached a really, really long. And it was very difficult for me, and my parents at the time, they didn't want me or my siblings going down that path because there was a lot of scorpions, centipedes, just dangerous animals that could have hurt us. So we weren't really allowed to go down there. But I did look where I saw it that day. I just stood over the cliff and just stared down to see if I could make out anything that it might have left behind for me to see and just understand.
Scorpions, centipedes, and don't forget about Dogman.
Yeah, Dogman. That's the big one.
Yeah, I'd say so. From what you said, it had skinny arms. How was it holding its arms, though, when it was standing next to you?
It was almost like they were hanging. They were a little bit bent by the elbows, and it looked like they were just hanging off its back or like hanging off its sides. And they were really, really long, and they went to its knees, a little bit lower actually. And it was just very strange because I've never seen any animal with arms like that. It just completely blew my mind, and I just didn't know what to make. It was just really long arms that were completely covered in hair.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a sight you're never going to forget.
Not at all.
How would you describe its fur? Was it mangy looking or pretty well kept?
It looked very dirty. It had a lot of dirt and like mud and I think scratches of some sort. It was a thick coat. It was a very, very thick fur coat. It looked like it was almost impenetrable. Like I'm pretty sure it would be very difficult cutting into it because of how thick the fur was. So it didn't look too well kept, but it was definitely a very thick coat.
Interesting. What color was it?
It was like blackish, brownish. With the moonlight, it kind of gave it like a grayish glare.
I see. Well, that's a pretty common description for Dogman fur. How close did it get to you at its closest point?
So at its closest point, it was around 2 feet away from me. I'd say its head was very close to mine, and it was around 2 feet away from me. It was very close.
Ooh, that is close. If he was 10 feet tall, did he hunch over to get his head closer to yours, or did he stand straight the whole time?
So he was standing straight for the most part until after the howl. He kind of just slouched over and turned around. It looked like it would take him plenty of time to be able to bend over based on how tall he was. It was just very eerie to me and just a lot I couldn't explain. And it just stood there and then just got really close.
I can only imagine. Yeah, eerie doesn't do it any justice at all. Could you smell it or its breath when it was so close to you, standing there?
So I felt its breath. It smelled kind of like dried blood of some sort. It wasn't that foul of a smell, but it wasn't the best smell either. I don't really know how to describe the smell because it was just very warm. The wind that was blowing at me, it was just very warm and it just very viscous and it was very thick and it was just like this really like potent smell.
I can think of a lot of things I'd rather smell than Dogman breath, that's for sure. You told us about the olive trees that were around, but did you have any forests close to where you had that encounter?
Yes. Near that, where I had the encounter, there was a dam. We could see it from where our farm was, where the house was. If you looked down, you could see a valley, lots of trees, and you could see the water reservoir. And there was plenty of trees around, and it was mostly a rural area, so a lot of people had land with a lot of trees in it. It was like, I wouldn't say forest, but there was a lot of trees.
Yeah, unfortunately, that sounds like a great place for a Dogman.
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of food resources were there that a Dogman could feed on?
Oh, there was livestock. We had sheep, goats, chicken, rabbits, pigeons.
Yeah, sounds like a regular smorgasbord. Did you have any problems with livestock going missing, or were they always accounted for?
When we weren't at the farm, there was people that would stay there and they would look after the farm. And there was always like talk about just livestock. Like we thought the farmers were eating them. They just go missing sometimes. And we would just see the numbers decrease slowly. And we didn't really think too much of it. We just thought the people working there were eating them.
Well, we don't know for sure that's what happened, but little did you know that those animals might have been taken by that Dogman. That's unfortunate.
Probably.
Yeah, it just might have been. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Abdullah, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Sure. Everybody listen to Vic. Vic knows what he's doing, and Vic understands this and is very, very good at explaining and comforting you after an encounter like this. And I do encourage everyone that hears this to reach out to Vic and tell him about your stories. I'm sure you will find a lot of closure within that. Hopefully you get the answers you need to be able to move on from this. Stuff like this can happen to anyone, and it's just a matter of how we deal with the aftermath and what we can learn from it and what we can take from it. So don't ever think it's wrong for you to have encounters like this and to have the thoughts you had after an encounter like this, because it is a very terrifying thing. But with the right support and the right people, you can hopefully overcome this.
Well, that's all very well said. And you're right, you can't control if you have a Dogman encounter or not, but you can control how you deal with it. If you do have an encounter and you want help, then by all means, please do reach out to me and let me know, and I'll do whatever I can to help. But having said that, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing the details of that experience with us, Abdullah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Vic. This was all a great pleasure of mine. I enjoyed this very much.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks again so much. Have a great night.